This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of the Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Welcome to Right to Life Radio. Happy 2022. Well, this is, wait, I forgot. This is our second show of 2022. We did a show on New Year's Day.
That's right.
Because we don't take, it takes more than a little federal holiday to keep us from doing Right to Life Radio. We'll do a show on Christmas. We'll do a show on New Year's. We don't even care.
That's right.
There you go. Anyway, welcome to Right to Life Radio. We have some very interesting, I think, California-specific content for today. This is, Jonathan, the fourth best pro-life podcast in the entire country, according to, what was that random website we found that measured that?
Yeah. Top pro-life podcast.
It was like
biz.
It was like a real thing, and it was like measuring pro-life podcasts. I guess they were doing metrics for all these different kinds of genres of podcasts, and seemingly had actually like listened and had comments on it. So anyway, yeah. We're the fourth best pro-life podcast in America. Lila Rose, Eat Your Heart Out, Father Pavone.
That's right.
Tough Beans. We're number 4. So anyway, okay. Usually, for the fourth best pro-life podcast in America, a lot of the time we're talking about national issues, but this week we're talking about California issues. And Jonathan, we're going to talk about a very significant piece of legislation that has been introduced into the California legislature. Yes, the California legislative year has begun. Yes, horrible bills are starting to be introduced in Sacramento, much to all of our chagrins. And this bill isn't explicitly the kind of thing that necessarily Right to Life, would take a position on as a theoretical question.
It's not, we don't normally, or you guys don't, and we don't at CFC, California Family Council, we don't always get into the minutia of budgetary matters or of other public policy. In fact, John, I would argue, not to tick off some of our super conservative folks, but I would argue that there are some cases where a more beneficent government response in healthcare could actually be considered pro-life.
Hey, you know what? There's that whole quadrant of fiscally liberal and socially conservative voters who are just there for the taking. If the Republican Party in California is going to compromise on something, maybe we should stop compromising on the social issues and start compromising maybe more on the fiscal issues. Anyway, just my little opinion. Anyway, so the bill we're talking about is a proposal to create a single-payer healthcare system for the state of California. So universal, California paid for healthcare. Now, I am leery of this bill's prospects for success, just given the power of the insurance industry, the medical insurance industry, both in this state and throughout the country. The idea of the government being the single payer for insurance costs, I think, seems to me a little far-fetched that such a thing would ever ultimately really pass the state legislature. Yes, there are some super hardcore left-leaning members of the state legislature who will go for that, but I find it difficult to think that that's ultimately going to pass. I think if anything passes, it'll be some kind of government option instead. Maybe, I don't know, a more California-specific form of Obamacare that covers anyone who's in any sort of gap of coverage. But I find it difficult for it to pass. The thing, though, that I want to talk about is that this is getting more attention than it got last year. It's actually going to be voted on in a committee.
Yes.
There's a committee chair, the Assembly Health Committee or Senate? It was Assembly or Senate that was introduced in, Jonathan.
Yeah, I
think
need to
Greg,
look. It's semi-breaking news when we were recording this.
Yeah, I think your employee, Greg, was texting around about it. It's actually going to be possibly passed through a committee, at least, which does not necessarily mean it's going to ultimately succeed, but it's moving along. It's moving along better than people thought it would.
After basically last year, just to clarify, when people say moving along, last year it was not even assigned a committee.
Wasn't even assigned a committee.
And this is, so for people to understand, everything that happens at the Capitol, if you're a legislator and you introduce a bill the first thing that happens is it goes to the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee is like, all right, what is this bill dealing with? Is it a fiscal bill? Does it deal with criminal justice? Does it deal with transportation? Is it water management? Is it having to do with the fires or public utilities, whatever it is? And normally the Rules Committee says, all right, this bill, at least it covers one topic, healthcare, for example. But in a lot of cases, bills are double or rarely they are triple referred. And it's all right. This bill needs to go through the health committee,
this committees,
the judiciary committee, and then if it has a financial impact, it goes to the appropriations committee.
Right.
In this case, they said, nah, we're not giving you the time of day. This bill doesn't even get a committee. It is an orphan.
But now, this year, it is getting a committee.
Right.
So the bill is called AB 1400. So Assembly Bill 1400. It was introduced by San Jose Assembly member Ash Kyra, who is a guy.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it Ash Kyra or Ash Carla?
Or Ash Carla, maybe, or
I think it's
Ash Calra.
I think it's Calra.
Calra. Ash Calra. Sorry, apparently my eyes are failing. By the way, we got a new scale over at the Obria Clinic, the Obria Medical Clinics of Central California, the Right to Life subsidiary. We have a scale in there. We've just opened our doors, by the way, if you want to go. 559-705-6911. If you're pregnant and you want some prenatal care, maybe you're on Medi-Cal, maybe you don't have insurance, you want prenatal care, give us a call. We have a brand new scale in there, Jonathan, and either that scale is weighing everything 10 pounds too heavy, or I am fat. So,
well, it is immediately after the holidays.
Yes, it is. So your boy Johnny G is hitting the treadmill a little harder these days than normal. So
this is just, I think, John, we can turn this into a positive. This is just a testament.
Well, it's very positive. It's positive.
This is
plus sized even.
This is just a testament to the incredible skill in the Polish-Italian cooking fusion of your household.
There you go.
Your wife is just such a good cook.
Or I'm eating too much crappy, eating takeout at lunch. And so anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
so AB 1400 introduces a California single-payer healthcare bill. It actually would amend the California Constitution to do so. A single-payer healthcare system paid for with a combination of payroll tax increases, business gross receipts taxes, and personal income tax increases for higher income earners. So this would be a true single-payer healthcare system for California. Now, why are we talking about this? Right to Life is not a health insurance organization. We don't really take positions on things like single-payer healthcare versus our current system versus Obamacare versus whatever. We don't really take positions on that stuff as far as the mechanics of how that works. However, given that many of those issues, especially in a state like California, which is not at all averse to funding abortion, and this is taking place in a certain political context, the Supreme Court might be overturning Roe v. Wade in June. The state of California has both Governor Newsom and many members of our legislature, including the state Senate pro tem, the state Senate leader, Tony Atkins, have publicly pledged to make California a sanctuary state for abortion, that they want state money to pay for out-of-town people to have Medi-Cal coverage for abortion, out-of-state people, rather, to have Medi-Cal coverage for abortion, pay for travel for people to come to California to get abortions, pay for lodging for people to come to California to get abortions, pay for childcare for people to have abortions, to make California an abortion magnet for, I guess, presumably Texas or any other states in the American West that might wind up banning abortion. I have not gone through all of the details of AB 1400 to create this, new single-payer healthcare system. But
it's going to be hundreds of pages long, super complicated, and I'm sure very, very pro-life, John.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that there is no way that this... And look, let's also understand... We have to kind of understand the direction in which the left is going. They introduced last year. It didn't happen, but it's probably, I think, going to happen this year. Legislation was introduced to eliminate all out-of-pocket expenses for anyone who has any insurance for abortion. So they want abortion to be universally 100% covered and paid for. That is what the pro-choice side that dominates the state legislature, that is what they want. That's their goal. Their goal is to pass that bill this year too, to eliminate any barrier to abortion access. That is their goal. So if you have a universal healthcare system where the government is covering all of your health insurance, guess what, guys? I mean, there's no way that this wouldn't be yet another massive expansion in abortion funding from paid for by the public, paid for by taxpayers. They're very open about, we want to increase taxes in order to pay for this huge single-payer healthcare system. And there's no doubt in my mind that this is going to include a massive subsidization, maybe 100% subsidization, have all abortion expenses in this state paid for by the taxpayers. So this is why I am leery of it. Now, maybe this is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, if they pass legislation to say no out-of-pocket expenses for anyone who has insurance for the cost of abortion, maybe all abortion is covered anyway. But it is still, nonetheless, I think I find it scary that this is just going to further entrench legal abortion in our state.
And John, I do think another concern about this, we haven't quite talked about this yet, but there are two ends of the healthcare spectrum. There's the beginning of life and there's the end of life. Mm-hmm. And as we see in other countries that do have some sort of government healthcare, very often there is an attempt, because there can be a lot of expenses at both of those extremes. Basic guaranteed minimum care, like a checkup, mm-hmm. costs like $100. I mean, right. It's really throwaway. It's very inexpensive.
Right.
But pregnancy and all of its related expenses can cost a lot of money. Delivery, labor and delivery can cost a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And having a child born with special needs that might need special care at the beginning of life mm-hmm. costs a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And on the reverse, at the end of life, costs a lot of money.
I've heard some statistics, which there's damn lies in statistics, but that something like 80% of the medical expense that someone will consume over the course of his or her life is consumed in the last year of life. And that might be an exaggeration, but you get the point.
Well, and John, I'll say at the beginning of life, this is something actually before the show I forgot, but this is a huge topic that we should discuss. This bombshell New York Times report about the prenatal diagnoses.
Well, if only we had a radio show where we could do just that. When we return, shocking news about prenatal testing and how for basically everything other than Down syndrome, it's a total sham. Next on Right to Life Radio. So, I want to talk about a huge New York Times story.
Oh, yes.
That touches on a long-standing topic of concern for pro-lifers, which is the topic of fetal testing. Now, there are some pro-lifers who sort of think fetal testing is inherently bad because so many people utilize various forms of fetal testing, particularly chromosomal testing, in order to identify Down syndrome kids chiefly early on and then use those testing results as the basis for an abortion. Now, I think it's one of those things where I don't think fetal testing is inherently wrong. I don't think fetal testing for Down syndrome even is inherently wrong. I could see someone from a pro-life perspective, wanting some time to get prepped and ready. And I know some folks who have kids who were born with special needs who learned about it, early in the pregnancy, and the very pro-life people who valued that. However, this story from the New York Times is really shocking. Basically, what they found is from some of these companies that do this kind of chromosomal testing, like Quest and others, is that they have enormously high false positive rates.
Shockingly high.
So if you
and John,
shockingly, astonishingly high.
I would say, as we've heard somewhat not joked about, but discussed about, if the police make a mistake and they shoot the wrong guy,
right,
that's a pretty big deal.
It's a pretty darn big deal.
It doesn't happen very often, but
relatively speaking, it does not.
But if it happened, I don't know, 1 out of 100 times.
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. If 4 out of every 5 people that the police shot was the wrong person to shoot, we would abolish the police department tomorrow.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about here with a lot of this medical testing. So the chromosomal testing for Down syndrome is still relatively accurate, is what I was sort of gathering from this article. But a lot of other chromosomal disorders, for every 100 positive tests that are yielded, for many of them, at least 80 of those 100 positive tests are false positives, as in the kid doesn't actually have this condition. And yet people are getting these test results, and many people are making an abortion decision on the basis of it. So let's go through some of these numbers for some of these diseases. So Degeorge Syndrome. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno. It's Degeorge Syndrome. Can cause heart defects and delayed language acquisition. So it's certain kinds of mental handicaps, heart defects. 81% of the positive tests are false positives. Not 81% are true positives. 81% are false positives. So only 19% are actually accurate positives. 1p36 deletion, which can cause, this is a chromosomal disorder, which can cause seizures, low muscle tone, and intellectual disability. 84% of the positives were false positives. Cri-du-Chat syndrome can cause difficulty walking and delayed speech development. 80% wrong. Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, which can cause seizures, growth delays, and intellectual disability. 86% of the positives are false positives. Prader-Willi and Engelmann syndromes, or Angelman, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, I apologize, can cause seizures and an inability to control food consumption. 93% of the positives are false positives.
John,
I mean, that's astonishing.
I think it's important you point out. People might be listening to this and saying, like, oh, wow, those are a lot of cases. No. We're not talking about this is the number of people that test positive. We're talking about the fact that for however many people test positive, let's say, roughly speaking, let's take one of those. Let's say that you do the test and 20% of them test positive. So 100 women take the test, 20 of them test positive.
Right.
19 of those 20 are wrong.
Yeah.
That means it's really only maybe 1 of 100 women that get the test are actually positive. But 19 of 20 women, 19 of 20 families have this horrifying scare. Oh my gosh, your son or daughter.
And all of them, when they get that false positive, probably in every single case, a doctor, a nurse, or some jackass is saying, should you abort?
And John, I'm guessing, if you're wondering what this segment and this story has to do with our first segment, there's probably a lot of financial incentives for the state to really encourage them to not pursue an expensive course of treatment.
Right. A baby with a lot of birth defects and chromosomal disorders is going to eat up a lot more healthcare resources, especially in a single-payer system, than a baby who is just aborted before they can incur all of those costs. All right, when we return, we'll have more California-specific stuff, all kinds of California stuff going on. Interesting stuff about fetal homicide. Next on Right to Life Radio, right here on Power Talk. Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. All right. I am going to talk about a very weird and interesting story that is connected with our push as a pro-life movement nationally, more generally, to outlaw abortion. And one of the constant objections you hear from the left, and it's very weird when this happens, is that they say, you're trying to criminalize miscarriage. and they will raise weird objections for certain instances of someone miscarrying, that would be criminalized. And I find that to be a silly objection. If someone is genuinely miscarrying, then I cannot fathom any kind of draft of any kind of pro-life law that's outlawing abortion, which in most of these legal proposals for outlawing abortion, they're going to probably put more of the weight of criminal punishment or what have you on the doctors rather than on the women. And I just find it very difficult to understand this. So we have here a story out of California about a woman who intentionally miscarried. So a woman who intentionally took drugs
yes,
in order to have her child be a stillborn.
Well, and that's the question, John.
Mhm.
The intent.
Yeah.
Because even if you did not do it intentionally,
right.
If you take drugs, if you know you are pregnant and you are using illegal, illicit, hard drugs,
right.
Is there a consequence for that?
Right. And this is one of the things where, let me put on my lawyer hat here. So this is one of the things that's difficult to talk about with abortion as it relates both to kind of the hardliner, the abortion abolitionist crowd, Jonathan, who I know you're kind of familiar with.
Yeah.
Which is this specific group of, I think they're mostly Protestant Christians who do not play nicely with Catholics among their various.
They don't play nicely with anybody.
They don't really play nicely with anybody. But that's one of their many lovely traits is that they think Catholics are pond scum. So and they're very big on, we need to propose legislative proposals to completely abolish abortion and with no compromises and no gradual work and blah 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 blah. Which is, yeah, I want to see abortion abolished. I don't know why they put such stress on the idea. We're abortion abolitionists. It's like, yeah, well, anyone who wants abortion to be illegal is an abolitionist. But anyway. And they're very big also. We need to just prosecute abortion as homicide. And they're very big on using that word homicide, which I'm not denying that abortion is a kind of homicide. But they're also very big on, you need to prosecute women who have abortions for homicide at the same level and to the same extent that you would prosecute the doctor or you would prosecute anybody. And one of the things about the law that I think a lot of this abolitionist crowd does not understand, and the general public sometimes has a bad way of understanding, is that the law has a spectrum of ways that it can approach a topic. Okay? It's a very broad spectrum of ways it can approach a topic. From, on the one hand, criminal penalties attached to someone participating in a certain activity, on one perspective, on one end of the spectrum, all the way to government subsidization and promotion of that activity. Okay? There's a lot in between there. And sometimes people don't understand that. For example, the Texas abortion law, I thought was brilliant in a certain perspective. Does it put the same kinds of penalties to abortion in Texas that it does for normal acts of homicide, for murder or something? No. It makes abortion a civil offense. And clearly it's trying to do that in some ways because it's trying to kind of get around Roe v. Wade. But guess what? By allowing private parties to sue abortion doctors, they basically stopped abortion in Texas. Not 100%, but they massively reduced the number of abortions that are happening in Texas. And all the abortions that are happening illicitly by doctors running the risk of getting their rear end sued. So it doesn't impose liability on mothers. It does impose liability on doctors, yet it's not treating it 100% as murder for, murder convictions for all parties involved with, life sentences. It doesn't do that. And that's sort of the thing that I think people don't understand, is that the range, you can have the state take an appropriately negative perspective towards abortion without necessarily punishing the women who might choose abortion, or even every woman who chooses abortion, or maybe there are ways even to differentiate between some people, without necessarily locking them up and throwing away the key for the rest of their lives. And there are ways in which one can acknowledge that someone might be choosing abortion out of extreme duress or societal pressures or this, that, or the other. Maybe there are people who aren't choosing it for that reason, though, and maybe we can scale things and structure things differently for different kinds of punishments, for different kinds of situations. Or we place the focus of our prosecutorial efforts on the doctors, or, basically it's this notion that it's not just black and white. It's not just illegal, go to jail for the rest of your life, or totally legal and let's have the government fund it. There's right. A big spectrum of perspectives there. And I think a pro-life person like us can take the perspective of, yes, we are outlawing abortion. Here is the way we are going to do it. And then we can have prudential arguments and disagreements over, okay, what are the exact penalties involved? How are we applying this legal standard that is opposed to legalized abortion and going to prohibit it with criminal penalty, with what kinds of penalties? Criminal penalties, civil penalties. How are we going to do that? So anyway, a little off topic, but here we are.
Well, John, and if you read this story, there's a website called The Cut, and I think it's I'm trying to remember if it's
out of the New Yorker.
Yeah,
or something.
The New Yorker.
Yeah.
So if you go to it, there's an article from September 20th, and it's responding.
And it's based in the San Joaquin Valley. It's based in Hanford. Yeah, this is a national publication, but this is in Hanford.
So. The whole story here, like, it is almost unbelievably tragic to hear this story, because you read this story and literally, John, I'm just going to read you one example of this. Uh-huh. After it talks about this poor woman, and I will say poor, I mean, I think she made a horrible choice to use drugs, but listening to stories of her being abused as a child, mm-hmm. her parents being drug users, her grandparents being drug users.
Right.
And then she talks about losing several children to CPS. Let me just read one paragraph. Okay. She started using more and got pregnant again. Like her previous pregnancies, she tells me, her 8th pregnancy was a surprise.
Oof. Okay.
Adora's uncle was able to adopt her 8th child. A friend of Sabrina's adopted the 9th. And Adora's ex-boyfriend got sober and took custody of his children, the 2 eldest. Although she didn't have any custody of them, she did see her 6 oldest children often. When she found out in 2017 she was pregnant again, she was excited but determined this would be her last baby. So, folks, this is her 10th pregnancy.
Right.
And if you read the whole story, it's a heartbreaking story of drug use. And I'm not just talking about pot. I'm not talking about marijuana. Heartbreaking story of meth use by this entire extended family. Uh-huh. And I think, John, this is an example of the tragedy of what happens when our laws, in many cases, we have, as a society, as a culture, I think we have really failed to appropriately address these horrible drug epidemics. And then it ultimately leads, when you just allow stuff like this to be untreated and unresolved, and there's a host of factors that lead to this, but you then end up with these incredibly tragic stories of people that are consistent drug users that have been using drugs off and on through 10 of their pregnancies.
Right.
Ultimately, tragically, one child dying as a result of the drug use.
Right. And so she then gets prosecuted for basically intention. The idea behind the prosecution is that she intentionally caused fetal demise through her use of drugs. And this was a prosecution that happened in California. And the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, has intervened to say that that is an inappropriate use of California's homicide laws, that we should not be prosecuting people in this situation. Now, I want to kind of get away from, to a certain extent, I want to get away from the specifics of this woman's case. We have to acknowledge the humanity of the unborn child. And the only way in which California law really does that, other than traditional common law things like inheritance and things like that, an unborn child can inherit property and in certain ways is treated like a person, is through things like California laws that allow you to prosecute someone for a double homicide if they kill a pregnant woman. Okay, there are certain ways in which our criminal law, of all things, recognizes the humanity of the unborn child, and people ask me all the time about that. People ask me, well, how come they can prosecute someone for 2 murders when they kill a pregnant woman, but abortion's legal? And my only answer to these people is that California, well, at least before recently, California was big on heavy penalties for criminal justice issues and loved abortion. So that was really the only, and there was no logical connection between the two. We liked in the old 3 strikes era, we liked locking up criminals for a long period of time, and we were okay with abortion. So hence this irrational thing. But I think there should be, I mean, at least some kind of perspective of, while this woman's case is tragic and horrific and horrible, and I feel terrible for someone who's so addicted to drugs that they would get to this level of abusing drugs to the point of killing their unborn child.
Yeah.
If someone is methed out and beating up their kid who's outside the womb, we don't treat that with kid gloves. We're ready to bury people like that under the jail. And, I to a certain extent, obviously for people who are genuinely addicted, maybe there's some different sort of way in which we deal with that situation, whether it's drug rehab and maybe their criminal sentencing is different based on the fact that they're addicted to drugs. But I find it distressing that we would not even approach a case like this with any sort of mindset that this is a homicide, that this is some kind of a homicide of some sort. I think it is. I think if you are so deliberately putting a child in harm's way, I think our law, and again, as we said earlier in the segment, the law is a big spectrum of different ways and approaches to dealing with problems in society, from criminal prohibitions on it all the way to subsidization of it. There's a big spectrum. But I find it really troubling that this is just, under California law, this is just deemed okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to close out the show, we'll have more for all of you, especially on some California issues. Maybe some final thoughts on these California-specific proposals and the idea of having a single-payer healthcare system, how all this could interplay next on Right to Life Radio. Right to Life Radio, thank you all so much. All right, I forgot what I was actually going to talk about in this segment, and now I remembered what I was going to talk about. So, here's what we're talking about. A big milestone for yours truly, but more importantly, a big milestone for Right to Life and for the pro-life community in Fresno. We have opened this week the Obria Medical Clinics of Central California. Finally, and we've seeing our first patients and starting to do great work. This has been a project I've been working on kind of on and off for many, many years. I am the CEO of this clinic and in charge of business and advertising and public relations and all kinds of stuff.
In fact, you're wearing the badge right now.
I am actually, because I just came from there, I'm wearing my CEO badge. For those of you watching on News Channel 8, I am wearing my CEO badge, and it's pretty great. We've got a great staff. Our Dr. Amy Holmes is great. Our nurse practitioner, Jennifer Hurley, is great. Our nurse managers, Christina and Melissa, are great. It's a great place, and we are serving people on Medi-Cal, people with no insurance, people with insurance. We want to serve as many people as we possibly can. If you are interested in coming to see us, please do get a hold of us. 559-705-6911. I have to completely remember it. That is the phone number for the front desk of the clinic. If you want to book an appointment, if you are pregnant, if you want to pass on that phone number to someone who is pregnant, maybe someone you know who's on Medi-Cal. Not a lot of docs wanting to take Medi-Cal for prenatal care. It doesn't bill great. We are willing to do it. So we are here to serve our community, provide great, high-quality care for lower-income persons. 559-705-6911. I never thought, Jonathan, I think if you had told me in 2013 when I was graduating from law school at Notre Dame, former student of Amy Barrett, no problem. If you had told me in 2013, hey, John, 8.5 years later, you're not actually going to be in legal practice. You're going to be running a small prenatal healthcare clinic and also running Right to Life of Central California and hosting 2 radio shows. I would not have guessed that would be my path. So,
but it's a pretty fun one.
It's pretty cool.
And if I may say so, if I can brag a little bit, you're pretty good at it.
Well, thanks. Well, I'm at least I'm okay at radio. I don't know about everything else. Hopefully I'll be good at running the clinic too. So, anyway, to all of you who supported us in this endeavor, who supported Right to Life, who supported Obria, thank you. If you want to learn more, you can go to obria.org. The Fresno landing page isn't quite 100% done, but it's got our phone number, a list of services. If you just type in our zip code, or type in Fresno, and you'll figure it out. So anyway, 559-705-6911 if you, during Monday through Friday, during business hours, if you want to be a patient of Obria. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next week on Power Talk.